I'm Barry Smith, I'm the Director of the Institute of Philosophy and I'm the founding Director of the Centre for the Study of the Senses. So we're here at the Royal Institution working alongside the Arts and Humanities Research Council to bring people from the sciences, the arts, the humanities together to look at food, because food is one of those things which is many dimensional. You've got a historical object, you have a cultural object, an economic object, something chemical, something perceptual. All of these sciences and arts can be combined when we're looking at food, how it's presented, what its aesthetics are, how we enjoy it, how it works on us, how we grow it. People are fascinated by food, and so by coming together at the Royal Institution, we're going to get people to explore how their senses work so that they become a little more aware of what's going on in them and even more aware of what they're eating.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to Food, the Brain and Us. Food is one of those things which we have been attending to from birth. We have a sense that discriminates our engagement with the world immediately that we're born, giving us liking or disliking, giving us a way of interacting with those things that we put in our mouths or won't keep in our mouths for long. And because food has now become a source of adventure for us, and the choice is proliferating all over the Western world, and we're mixing up cultures, flavors, we found out not only about what we can eat and where it came from, but we're starting to investigate even more seriously what happens in us when we eat. All of the things that go on in our brain, in our senses, and the combinations of those to give us the flavor experiences that we like, we prefer, and that drive us to select our particular favorite food choices. Now, this evening is a chance for us to do the theoretical part of it. We're going to look at the science, both of what comes to us in eating, but also what happens to us when we eat. And as well as doing the science, we're going to remind you there are not only theoretical gains to be had here, but food is also fun. And you're going to, I hope, experience that, because after the theoretical part, you're going to have a practical part. We're going to take you out and give you a tasting menu of experiences where we'll try to demonstrate to you some of the things that are going on. Now, this evening's event is brought to us as a joint collaboration between the Royal Institution and the Arts and Humanities Research Council. And I'm Barry Smith, and I'm the lead fellow for the Science and Culture theme for the Arts and Humanities Research Council. And the reason I want to do something here with the Royal Institution is because when we look at food, we realize how amazingly interesting it is to so many areas of study, to so many disciplines. You can think of food economically, you can understand food in its cultural aspect. We're going to explore some of the history of food and eating, what our ancestors ate. How does that and how do the cultures we live in shape what we choose to eat, and how does that affect how things actually taste to us in our mouths? And because we're going to use all of the different disciplines that we can in a very short space of time, we're going to have a historian, a neuroscientist, an artist, and a chef. And that's just a tiny part of what we could have considered when we look at all the ways in which food interests us. So we're interested in what goes on in that moment when you pop something in your mouth. And most of us think it's very simple. Put something in your mouth, chew it, crunch it, swallow it, it's gone, over very fast. And the main thing you're interested in is, do I like it? Do I want any more? Maybe I don't like it. But liking sometimes distracts us. It sometimes stops us from thinking about the food itself. What does it taste like? And how do we have those experiences of taste? What gives rise to them? Are they all coming from the tongue? Well, maybe, maybe not. We're going to explore that. You'll hear Charles Spence from Oxford, from the Cross-Modal Lab, talking about all of the sensory goings-on that might affect what we eat. But our preferences, our initial preferences, might be set partly by nature. We know that children, whether they're infant children or whether you've got baby rats or baby chimps, will all have that same liking for sugar. If you give them a sweet sucrose solution, lick the lips. You give them something bitter, blah, don't want it, reject it. And because most toxins are bitter, it's a good idea that from birth you will reject bitter flavors. Because toxins, not all of them, but most of them, going into the mouth, recognized as bitter, you expel them and you protect yourself. But how come, as adults, we suddenly learn to drink alcohol or coffee and we eat green vegetables? How do we do that? What's gone on? What's developed our sense of taste? And how do we develop or acquire tastes? How does that happen? And the tastes that we have now, in London in particular, when you look at the volume, the prodigious volume of ingredients that we have in our supermarkets, where did we get our appetite for just those things and not others? Why do we like some foods and why do we find some foods repelling or too difficult or too demanding? Is it just where we were born? Is it what we were used to? And how did our historical ancestors eat? Did they taste things just as we did? Did their tastes work differently, given that they were perhaps having a more meager diet or having a very restricted diet? And we're going to explore the history of eating, especially in medieval England, with Chris Woolgar. But we're also going to look at the way in which dining and the whole experience of dining has become very, very specialized. If you want to go out for dinner now, yes, maybe you'll go out and eat because you'd rather somebody else cooked it. But very often if you go to a restaurant and you say, I could have cooked that myself, it's an invitation to feel rather lazy. So we want to be amazed when we go out and eat. And now we see that the standards for having an extraordinary experience at the dining table, and not even always at a dining table, are raising the bar. And from artists and chefs working together, and from very experimental chefs like Ferran Adrià and Heston Blumenthal, we've learned to treat the experience of dining in a tasting menu as just that. It's an experience. Don't go to the Fat Duck if you're hungry, but go if you're curious. Go and find out how your senses work and what's having an impact on the way you perceive and eat your food. And tonight we're going to have Caroline Hobkinson, who is an artist with chef skills, who is putting food as central to her art and to the things that she will demonstrate to us and the things that she will delight us with. And she provides people in these special exhibitions or pop-up restaurants with extraordinary experiences. And food and the science behind it is one of the motivations. Finally, we'll hear from Charles Michel, a trained chef, trained in one of the most prestigious chef schools in Lyon, in Paul Bocuse, but also Colombian, and who is very interested in how he can bring a very strict and traditional, rather classical training in cuisine, together with the range of products and ingredients that you might find in Colombia and in South America. And how can you combine those? And can you combine them successfully, or will it always be, for both the Europeans and the South Americans, a little bizarre? He's going to give you lots of experiences later, which will be quite bizarre. Now, what we're going to do is, after the talks, there'll be time for some questions, and then, before you leave, we're going to give you your tasting menu, and your menu will be numbered 1 to 6. And when you go out, I want you to find your Royal Institution guide. They'll be wearing the blue badges, and they'll have their tour guide hand up, so they'll be number 1 or number 2, number 3, and so on to 6. And you follow that person, and that's your route through the tasting menu. So we hope you'll enjoy those experiences. But first, let's go back a little bit, and let's find out about the history of eating, and the history of eating and of everyday eating in England and in medieval England. So Chris Woolgar is a professor of history from Southampton University who studies the everyday and who believes passionately that you can't study the everyday experience in history until you study sensation and how people perceived the world around them, and eating being a very big part of that. And Chris is one of the leading historians, food historians, to really bring to life what we don't know and are now, through him, beginning to know about food history. Chris.
Thank you very much, Barry. I wanted to start really by posing a question. Why would I want to think about the senses in the past? Why aren't they like my physiology today? I mean, surely everything is the same. The more I looked at this question, the more I discovered that sensation in the past, perception in the past, works in very different ways. A lot of what goes on is culturally determined rather than biologically determined. Since the Enlightenment, the way that we perceive the world has been very much a closed process. If we go back further in time, perception is much more open. It's also a process that is not just one way, it's two-way. So if I, 600 years ago, were to touch this table, not only would I feel that it was solid, that it was smooth, but my moral qualities would pass to it, and its moral qualities would pass to me. Now that is really very significant indeed. The medieval period inherited from antiquity the notion of five senses, and you see on the left-hand side of the screen the wheel of the five senses from the Longthorpe Tower in Peterborough. And the sense of taste is the monkey or the ape on the bottom corner there, just about to put something into its mouth. But one needs to understand how this works in terms of eating and taste. Taste is just one of the senses of the mouth. It's, if you like, the incoming sense, whereas speech is the outgoing part of the sense. So, for example, we can see that you might acquire the characteristics of the animal that the meat that you've eaten has come from. So you get strength from meat in that sort of way. If you're eating the Eucharist, you might acquire holiness as well in that particular way. But these things are not quite as clear-cut as that sometimes. There are lots of treatises called lapidaries, which are about stones and the magic and the law that's associated with them. Well, one of the ones we have from Peterborough Abbey from the 15th century tells us that if somebody puts the stone under their tongue, they then speak truth. So this works in both ways. There is a moral connotation with this sense. The senses are all the gateways to the soul, and consumption is certainly critical in that. We perhaps still abstain from eating meat on Fridays and eat fish. The origin of that in the medieval period is connected with carnality, quite literally the fleshiness of the meat, making us lusty and gluttonous. So people eat fish to avoid that, not only on Fridays, on Wednesdays, on Saturdays, actually on about half the days of the year they abstain from meat. People are also trying to avoid sensory stimulation, and as we will see shortly, there is a very rich, spicy diet, and we have a very nice account from the canonization proceedings of Thomas Cantilupe, who was Bishop of Hereford and died in 1282. And the way that one eats tells you about an individual's virtue. So he was avoiding sensory stimulation. So his chefs would prepare for him the most beautiful dishes, highly spiced dishes. They would come to him, and he would mix them all up together so that the spices balanced each other out. So it was rather wasted on him, I think. By about 1100, Western Europe has acquired really from Arab medical texts a notion of what senses there will be. And they divide them, unlike us, we mainly think of four tastes. They will divide them into eight or nine. And you'll see that they'll be sweet, they'll be greasy, bitter, salty, sharp, harsh or styptic, salty like the sea, vinegary. And there is also a notion that taste is made up, like everything in the world is made up of bits of the four humours, and that's a critical ingredient in it. And likewise, the substance that goes with it is dependent on texture. And they talk about things being thin, interim, consistent. And that's also quite interesting, because when we look at medieval cooking, it's all about grinding up food. These are people without forks to help them keep their meat steady, as it were. So it can be carved for you and put on the plate, but most food is ground to a pulp in elite culture. So that, in a way, is the theory. What really makes a difference, though, to taste is cooking and consumption. And from really the late 12th century, we have sources that tell us a great deal about the preparation of food. Our earliest collections of recipes from this country come probably from the 1180s. All across Europe, from the 1160s, 1170s, we have domestic accounts. And then we also have physical remains as well. You've got the kitchen of the Abbot of Glastonbury there, built in the first part of the 14th century. Huge investment. There was another separate kitchen for the monks, and possibly a third for the lay visitors, particularly those who are just passing guests. What this enables us to see, particularly with the addition of archaeological remains, is a broader picture of what is consumed in medieval England. We can see as well that there is a common pattern to cooking all across Europe from about 1100 onwards. And it's a bit like, it's not exactly the same across Europe. It's a bit like Gothic architecture, in that Gothic architecture in Turin is different from Gothic architecture in Paris or in Canterbury. So there are variations. But the cuisine is characterized by highly spiced dishes, and it's characterized by thin, acidic sauces that are typically made with wine, with vinegar, with verjuice, and not with fats and oils. Another key component of medieval diet is preserved foodstuffs. This is the big conundrum before the 19th century, is how you preserve food in the long term, really, throughout the year. And round about 1100, in the period of 1000 to 1100, we get a very significant change in medieval diet. We suddenly get very large quantities of marine fish appearing across northern Europe. And it's clearly come from far out in the Atlantic. It's been preserved, typically salted and wind-dried. And likewise, we find meat is also salted. Sometimes it's dried, it's smoked. So a huge investment goes into this. And this must have some consequence, really, for how food probably tastes and how people perceive that. So we're looking really at the practical workings of this. Now, food is one of those substances that if somebody has something interesting on their plate, you want it too. And that applies equally across large swathes of society. So noblemen have spicy dishes, and the rest of the countryside thinks, well, what can we do? We can't possibly afford these spices. They've come from halfway across the world to this island, far out really into the North Atlantic almost. So it's a long journey, it's expensive, but we can grow interesting things in our garden plots. So people look to grow herbs and things that will substitute. We find preparations of ready-made sauces that are available in markets. One can see mustard being used, but even then there are gradations. People may not be able to afford mustard, and there are sort of not quite real mustards that are prepared out of radish seeds and sour ale as you go down the sort of social scale. So what happens is that the elite think, well, we need to keep ourselves distinct, and they will look to culinary practices that continue to distinguish them. The Black Death is quite an interesting turning point in this, because the Black Death kills people, but it doesn't kill animals, and it changes the ratio between livestock in the countryside and the human population. And all of a sudden, many people can eat much more meat, and they do. Aristocrats, however, try to eat less meat, and they start looking at other things that will change taste and flavour for them. And there are just a couple of examples there. The picture on the screen is of a citron, not a lemon, just to remind you that it's not only taste that's changing, it's sometimes it's animals that have been bred in particular ways, they will change. Does the meat taste the same? But also plants as well. We think of lemons, a slightly different taste to the citron. But citrus fruits come really into aristocratic diet in this country, fresh citrus fruits in the 15th century. And they're very highly prized. They're also very bitter. Until quite a way into the 16th century, for example, the oranges that come in are the Seville oranges rather than the ones that have been mixed with breeds from the species from the Far East, the sweeter breeds. But Henry VIII, in the inventory that's prepared after his death in 1547, has strainers for orange juice, silver strainers. So that's one indication of what's going on. Likewise with sugar. We find it originally as a medicinal condiment, really, in quite small quantities. As time goes on, more is made in the Mediterranean, much more comes to this country. In the 1450s and the 1460s, Anne Stafford, Duchess of Buckingham, quite a large household, probably 80 or 90 people, gets through about 60 pounds of sugar in a year. And she makes jam. She's probably one of the first people I found making jam. But if you fast forward 100 years, everything has changed. The floodgates have opened. There is suddenly a great deal more sugar. And these things affect very much the way that people think about taste and flavour. The more you have of something, the less you're able to distinguish in a way. So going back to our listing of flavours, one of the interesting things are the finer gradations that we had in that list of 8 flavours, particularly of the sour, the bitter, and the salty. And you can begin to see that in what they're eating. But as a concluding note, what I would say is that we have to be very aware that we don't think that something that is salty is exactly the same in conception as something that they thought was salty. The terminology doesn't necessarily map exactly. I can see something that's red, for example, and I might read a medieval manuscript, and that says something is red. We shouldn't assume they're the same things, because I can demonstrate that something that's red in a medieval manuscript might range from a yellowy orange through to a purple. Now, there's no reason why that should not also be true of taste. So we have quite a complex problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris. Also reminds me of the 18th century, as Steve Shapin has taught us. That's when we changed from having an objective conception of flavors and being in the foods to thinking it was just subjective and in our minds, because everybody wanted to taste the pineapple once discovered, and science had advanced greatly, but even scientists couldn't tell you what a pineapple tasted like, so people started to believe that maybe flavors were just in the mind. But nowadays, we might say they're in the brain. So we're going to ask that question by looking at the work of Charles Spence, someone who I collaborate with, and many of us do, at the Centre for the Study of the Senses in the University of London. And Charles is now part of a large grant project there, funded by the AHRC, called Rethinking the Senses. And so, Charles, from the Cross-Modal Lab in Oxford, would you take the story on?
Yeah, so I do look in history a little bit, but only as far back as 100 years and the futurists. But if I were to take somebody from the street now, a man or woman, ask them about taste, the sort of thing they'd come up with would be kind of the 4 basic tastes, I guess: sweet, sour, salty, bitter. If they've travelled a bit and been to some fancy restaurants, they might come up with a 5th taste of umami, kind of yumminess, well known from Asian cuisines, the taste of Parmesan cheese and in ripe tomatoes, say. But beyond that, that would be kind of the list of all the tastes that we know about. But as a psychologist, or as a neurogastronomist, or as a gastrophysicist, a range of terms for those who are interested in knowing about the brain and how that can help us to understand taste and flavour, we think maybe there are far more basic tastes. Maybe there are 20 or 25 things like kikumi, metallic. There may even be an electric kind of tingling taste that you may dare to try at the hands of Charles Michel a little bit later on. Even a sort of fatty acid taste. And so the psychologists, the neuroscientists, and the philosophers are kind of struggling to say what makes a basic taste. Why should we just have 4 or 5, and why not throw in all these other ones that are unfamiliar to us in our daily lives, but for which we might be able to point to a specific receptor on the tongue that codes for a particular kind of input. But really, I think when most of us actually talk about taste, what we mean is flavour. When I talk about the taste of food, and I'm thinking about fruitiness and floral notes and earthy and musty and meaty and things like that. But all those richer experiences of taste come not from our nose, not from our mouth, but really from our nose. And I think Barry will be demonstrating some of that in one of the exhibits outside a little bit later on. And quite how much of flavour, what we commonly call the taste of food, comes from our nose is a topic of intense discussion between me and some of my colleagues. But you will find some people out there who will say that as much as 80 to 95% of what you think of as a taste of food is really coming from your nose, not from your mouth. And that's part of the reason when people who come to the lab in Oxford with a complaint, it's nearly always the complaint that I've lost my sense of taste. What can you do? I can do nothing, I'm a gastrophysicist. But what they've really lost is not their taste. I can show that their taste buds are working fine, sweet, sour, salty, bitter, all perfect. What they've lost is the fruity, the floral, the meaty, the earthy kind of notes, and their nose is blocked. But they're kind of referring the stuff that's coded by their nose, all those rich flavour terms, and mislocalizing them into their mouth, which is an illusion called oral referral. And to try and understand why that happens, again, you might want to look in the brain of the subject or the participant or the diner, in fact, in some of our more real-world experiments. So those are 2 of the key senses involved in the taste of food and the flavour. I think a third one that we don't think about much, and which again will be a topic for exploration outside a little bit later, is touch or oral somatosensation. This is things like the temperature of a drink, the fact that cold Coke will taste quite pleasant, but warm it up, change the temperature, and suddenly it tastes too sweet. So the temperature, tactile qualities affecting the taste. This is also what's going on in this dish you can see here, the bacon and egg ice cream from the Fat Duck restaurant in Bray. And if you take a spoonful of that bacon and egg ice cream by itself, it's okay. You wouldn't go out and buy some from Tesco's. But when it's served in the restaurant, it works. And why does it work? It works because next to the ice cream on the left is a cube of kind of flavourless, kind of crispy fried bread. And what that brings to the flavour equation or the flavour experience is texture. So when you take a mouthful of the bread, the crispy bread, with the bacon and egg ice cream, what happens in your brain is that those flavours kind of ventriloquize and pull apart, and you experience the bacon flavour in the texturally appropriate crispy bread, and you leave the eggy flavour behind in the ice cream. So you get a separation of flavours in your mouth that's all done by your brain, combining, saying, what's most likely to be in my mouth now, and where should that bacon flavour really belong? And it's using the cue of texture or touch to give the answer. There's 3 senses involved in flavour experiences. The fourth one I think that's very important is what we see, the eye. And that can be the colour of foods or drinks themselves. And I'm going to try and play some tricks on you downstairs a little later on. But it can also be the colour of the plateware. And those 2 plates you see in front of you have no taste. They have no flavour. And yet, if you were to eat the dessert from one of those 2 plates, a strawberry mousse, this served in Ferran Adria's test kitchens in Spain, then those who ate the dessert of the black plate did rate it as 10% less sweet and 15% less flavorful strawberry mousse than the dessert on the right. Everyone's eating the same food, but the color of the plate is changing the taste that we ascribe to that dish. And of course, the potential health implications there, if I know that food will taste sweeter off a round plate and off a white plate, could be huge and important in things of obesity. We start these things in the lab, either in the lab in Oxford, which is very kind of scientific and unreal world, or sometimes in the test kitchens of restaurants, which are kind of a bit closer to real-world dining, but still not quite there. But when we find something we think that works, we then go to somewhere like the Paul Bocuse, where Charles Michel was trained, and there they have an experimental restaurant where people go, they book, they pay, they have a nice dinner with their friends, they get a discount, and for that discount, we asked them to fill in a questionnaire after their meal, and there you can see 2 of the actual desserts created by people like Charles Michel in the restaurant setting, and there too we've been able to show with real diners paying for the real dinner that plate colour matters and changes the taste. So when we think about taste and flavour, we think about not only the tongue but also the nose, the texture, the temperature in the mouth, but also what the eye is telling the brain. And if that's true, if vision can dominate, and again there's a whole neuroscience literature about why what we see might dominate the other senses, then how can we use that in a practical way, and how might we use that in the future? Well, here's Katsuo Okajima from Japan, and a pair of virtual reality spectacles you can buy online for about $1,000 and watch the movies in its hyper-realistic form. And above are 2 plates of sushi. Well, really just 1 plate of sushi. The plate on the left is some kind of cheap bit of fish, perhaps. The one on the right is what you might think you're going to eat. So people come to the restaurant of the future, they put on these spectacles, the fish has been fished dry, as it were, of the expensive, the really nice sushi. So what's a person to do? Well, maybe they don a pair of these headsets and then go to the restaurant, try the sushi, and if we can have the video, please. You'll see somebody having a dish of virtual sushi. The plate on the left is the actual sushi, and as they put their hand over the sushi, you can see the sushi on the right changes its texture, changes its visual appearance, and then you can just put your hand over. No, I don't like that fish. No, not that one. Keep going until you find the fish that you want, put it in your mouth, and it's got all the right texture, all the lighting cues, and the question is, how will diners respond? Will it really seem like they're eating the sushi they see? Is visual dominance that powerful? And if it is, can we use it to help preserve some of the fish stocks? And finally, the forgotten flavour sense is hearing. One that now people like Heston Blumenthal would say, I think of hearing and sound as one of the ingredients the chef can use in the kitchen. Never before did they think that. And why did they starting to think about sound more? It's probably to do with the Sonic Crisp experiment that you all, at least some number of you, can try. We have boxes and boxes of Pringles out there waiting for you to try the Sonic Crunch. And we're going to show you how, by playing with what you hear, when you bite into a Pringle, we can make that ultra crispy, crunchy, fresh as ever Pringle. And we do that by knowing about how the brain works, by knowing how if we change what you hear, you can change what you taste. And this is the kind of research that starts out with food companies who are very interested in trying to make healthier foods, or at least foods that are no less healthy, but as they reduce salt, sugar, fat, and the unhealthy ingredients, if you reduce those things, people say, what have you done to my brand? I don't like it anymore. But if you can use some of these illusions or tricks of the mind to preserve the flavor by sound, then that could be of interest. So we have all the senses, I think, combining together into what we think of as taste or flavor experiences. And the neurogastronomy tells us about the brain science, which allows us to predict what would happen if we changed the sound, the color of the food. And what we're trying to do at the moment is work with chefs and artists like Caroline and Charles Michel here in order to put some of that science into forms that are appealing, that people really want to taste. So here's one of them, the sound of the sea seafood dish from Heston Blumenthal's Fat Duck, the signature dish on the menu. When you go to the restaurant, outskirts of Slough, not a very nice bit of the country, how do you kind of capture that seaside, the Provençal rosé moment? Well, the waiter will come to the table with a plate of seafood that looks like the sea, maybe getting the visual dominance with the foam and the waves, not the waves, the seaweed and hopefully some seafood. On the other hand comes a conch shell out of which come some little iPod headphones. The waiter says, we recommend that you put the, probably with a French accent, we recommend that you put the headphones in before you start the dish. When you put the headphones in, what do you hear? The sounds of the sea with just the right number of waves crashing on the beach, just the right number of seagulls floating around overhead. And when you see people in the restaurant, they were chatting, talking to each other, distracted. They put the headphones in and they're silent. Their attention is squarely on the food, and if you attend to the food, it tastes better. Just for one course, you wouldn't want to do it for 5 hours, it'd be kind of boring, but for one course to illustrate the power of sound, I think that's a great thing. But one where the chef is bringing the technology to you. The same here, Denis Martin in Vevey in Switzerland, 2 Michelin stars. He makes modernist cuisine with smoke and foam and mirrors and espumas and all that stuff. And here's his take on the gin and tonic, the gin and sonic. Take a gin and tonic, put it in a balloon, blow the balloon up, put the balloon in a bath of liquid nitrogen, roll the balloon around, peel off the balloon. What you're left with is this perfect white kind of sphere glowing with illumination. Perfect gin and tonic as you've never seen it before, but there's one thing missing. The fizz of the bubbles are not there. So what can we do to bring back the sound that the modernist cuisine has taken out through artful presentation? Well, put one of those little loudspeakers onto the plate, and the sound of the fizz will actually come with this dish, but it will come from the dish rather than from the food placed on it. Again, the chef bringing the technology to you. But all of you probably have a mobile phone in your pocket, or an iPod, or an iPad, or a Samsung, or one of those sorts of things. When you go to restaurants, you can see people just playing away, Instagramming, taking pictures, being distracted from the food. Remember, if you pay attention to the food, it will taste better. And we think there's so much potential there with the technology at the table. Why can't we take our iPods and maybe serve dinner from them? We don't think of technology in that way, but they make waterproof ones nowadays. You can stick them, I guess, in the dishwasher. And what could you do if you could synchronize the sensations you received while eating? Technology in the hands of the diners. We could change the color of the plate just like that to whatever we wanted. We could synchronize music with the food. All exciting possibilities. And finally, when we think about flavor and taste, as the neurogastronomist, gastrophysicist hat on, we think about all the senses coming together. We think about the plateware, the cutlery, but we also think about the environment in which you eat. Wherever you eat, wherever you drink, it's somewhere. That somewhere sends out signals to your brain about sounds and smells and temperature and textures and feels and so on. And those sensory cues in the background from the environment, we think, are integrated into your experience of food. That's why food tastes so much better in the Mediterranean on your summer holiday. That's why when you bring those bottles of wine and cheese back home and open them on a cold winter's night with your friends, it's just not the same. Something's missed in the experience, and what's missing is the atmosphere. And if you know that part of the taste of food comes from the atmosphere, you can then play with that, be it with the sounds of the sea, or be it with the sensorium, an event we ran in Soho back in March, where people went room to room with a glass of whiskey and a scorecard in the other hand, and we changed the sounds, we changed the lighting, we changed the texture, the smells, and people could see as they went from room to room that the taste of the drink in their glass changed by as much as 20%. The glass was always in their hand, but they could see from their scorecards they were giving the same drink a different taste, hence demonstrating, we think, the importance of the atmosphere as part of what contemporary people think of as the taste of food. Thank you.
Charles, thanks very much. Wonderful demonstration of all the factors that will go into a flavor experience. And Charles and his colleagues from the Cross-Modal Lab and Ophelia Darrois from the Center for the Study of the Senses are going to be with you to try and get you to experiment and discover some of this for yourself. Now, we said it was fun and we said it was serious, and I think when we want to understand how it can be both at once and genuinely extraordinary, then we turn to art and artists. And that's why we're delighted to have Caroline Hobkinson to take us now from the toolbox to the arts. Caroline, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, so I'm Caroline Hobkinson, and I'm obsessed with eating in any form, especially eating as an experience. I'm trained as an artist, and that's why I say I'm an artist, but I work as well as a chef in all different ways. I really think that the way we eat is such an ingrained part of our culture that we hardly ever think about it. It's just taken for granted. The way, if you just look closely at a fork, it's just really bizarre, or the way just food is just stuck in front of us. So just gonna show what I'm doing, because it's a bit in that no man's land between food and art. So I curate experimental dining experiences. Sometimes you can call me a food artist or a concept chef. Using performance, video, cooking, writing in all forms, I try to reframe the everyday rituals of eating. I stage dining events, exploring the world through food. I really love to really grab people and force them out of their comfort zone. It's interesting how conservative we are when it comes to eating. We like new technology, but when it comes to eating, I'm not sure we really want that iPad at times, because we actually want our fork. I'm personally really annoyed if the fork is on the wrong side. So here, but I like to do this to other people. So here I built a huge table where people were literally sitting underneath the ceiling and then with their feet dangling. So the exhibition itself was people's legs, and the food was brought up by pulley systems. So punters in the gallery could not see what people were eating, and up there, a jolly time was had with the waiters popping through the openings, and obviously everyone else had a rather nice view of the diners from below. Another project I did is a secret sensory suppers at the Anders Hotel, where they discovered a secret Masonic temple And I really loved the idea of having people anonymously. So they were led while they were blindfolded into the room, and they remained masked throughout the whole idea, because only when we are masked, and obviously throughout the history, we obviously know that as well, we kind of really come out of our comfort zone mode. So we have individual assistants, we have a master of conduct, and people were, I was working with helium balloons to take the idea of touch away, so we were literally eating with our mouth rather than with our hands. So there's nothing in between us, our hands and our mouth. And this is another project I did for Salone in Milan, where I literally deconstructed the dining table and looked at the bizarre ways we interact with food. Especially when it comes to design, and there's a lot of attention given to different things, but never exactly to the meaning of how does a fork taste like, and how does a fork influence the taste in itself. But people all over the world obsess for the last 50 years in the perfect design of the fork, without actually being, like behind where they should be, maybe in between the right materials. This is another project I did in Berlin at the Grimm Museum, which is based on La Grande Boeuf, where I invited 20 people to commit suicide through overeating. And I stuck cameras in between the food. So you can see there that inside the food, people were being filmed. If anyone knows the film, it's a lot of food. And then the leftovers were left to rot for 6 weeks. So it's very much playing with the whole idea that one moment we really love food, when it comes to overconsumption, it becomes something quite different. In this case, it's almost like a moving, breathing vanitas painting, and it's overwhelming amount of smell as well in there, because sometimes, obviously, it begins to smell. This is something I did as a culinary evocation of 15 Elder Street, commissioned by the Royal Academy, where I was going through the 8 stages of a house and trying to imagine the ghosts who used to live in this place. So this is just a little excerpt of the menu, going from Roman spittle fields, going through hungry spittle fields, and literally served a dish of nothing, and really telling stories and the storytelling power of food. But obviously this all exists. I mean, the Holy Communion was mentioned, Thanksgiving, the way we interact with our wedding cake, the actual taste of the wedding cake. There's not much to it, but we all remember it as the most amazing taste we had, because it's actually eaten in context. It's how all the other senses are involved. It's visually, there's so much presentations, but inside it's just an oversweetened sponge. And the fantastic feast at the end of Eid as well, after fasting during Ramadan. So food is a manifestation of our longings, but I really believe it is a vocabulary of our life, because we really remember last Christmas, that was when we were in Italy and we had this great food. We use food as vocabulary, as punctuation to our life. My favorite food ritual is the wedding cake, the birthday cake, because for me it is incredibly universal. It only appeared, correct me if I'm wrong, in the last 60 years worldwide. And the taste sensation of eating a birthday cake is an ordinary oversweetened sponge. But the eating of it is a masterminded, multi-sensory spectacle. The anticipation, it has been baked especially for us. The light is dimmed, candles are lit, one symbolizing each year of our life. Another chorus of happy birthday to you. We close our eyes, make a wish, blow out the fire. The smell of the smoky wax, our wish will come true. Oh, how delicious. Suddenly we are 4 years old again. So we have all those 10,000 taste buds to detect 5 tastes, but our mind really creates most of our taste sensations. So eating is a fully immersive experience, and how do they interplay, and what happens if the sense of smell interplays with the sense of hearing, and it creates something like no other. So I was looking into how can we enhance it during these experiences, and then I came across Charles Spence. I got really excited that actually there is research done in exactly that very field. I found so fascinating, which gives me obviously most of the motivation for my practice. So I ended up collaborating on a multisensory menu, which I served up for 1 month at the House of Wolf. This is a little excerpt of the menu. And it really plays with the findings Charles mentioned before, the fact that so much of our taste experience is based on our hearing, and playing with it and showing it to people in the way that obviously not meaning that people should eat forever more with headphones and things, just to really draw attention to the way we eat and to enhance our dining experience in the way to reassess it. So science offers me a huge toolbox to play with. It's fantastic because it is almost like the artist's palette, and I just grab and take it from all different things, from how much taste is in the color to touch and taste. And there are specially made dining utensils where I carved fish fork style endings into tree branches, to really draw home the wild nature of eating meat and to kind of grow it back to the over-modulated fork. The one thing I find most fascinating is sound, and how to really modulate the experience of food through certain sounds. And when I heard that you can actually modulate the taste of food from sweet to bitter by changing certain frequencies, I thought that was really fascinating. So I started to play around with that. So I came up with a sonic cake pop, where I gave people a cake pop and a lollipop stick, and then a telephone number. So people could ring a certain phone number, and then they could literally dial a taste, and they could decide it. So diners were given a number to call, and they were prompted, press 1 for sweet, 2 for bitter. And it obviously does work, but it's fantastic where it could go. Whether we go one day into a coffee shop and we can have the perfect customized coffee, I don't know, it would be fantastic. So the experience of flavor is the integration of taste, touch, and smell. But flavor conjures memories, and I really am incredibly fascinated into involuntary memory, which obviously is known as well the Proust phenomenon. I won't read this out, but obviously most of us would have come across Proust or the episode of the Madeleines, when almost just by eating and dunking a Madeleine into warm tea, he is completely transported back into his past. He's not remembering it. He's not thinking, I'm going to have a Madeleine like I used to have when I was 12 years old, but he's dunking it, and suddenly it's almost like human time travel. He's just there, and he's there again. So obviously there are different kinds of memory, but involuntary memory is not just an unearthing of the past, but a reliving of the past as the present. We grasp the past as the present. So maybe Proust was a neuroscientist. I mean, there are different books on literature out there. I doubt it very much, but science is not the only path to knowledge. Where the brain is concerned, sometimes art was there first. So there's a French chef who first discovered umami, and with Cézanne and his wonderful way of looking at the world, obviously with influence in neuroscience as well. Picasso once said, we all know that art is not truth. Art is a lie that makes us realize truth. But just imagine where we'll go when we bridge those two cultures together. Because I really believe food is us, and that's how we remember our travels and our family and who we are. And eating is the most intimate way we interact with our brain. So, yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Caroline. I think that's a wonderful illustration of just how art and science can be not just sort of working side by side, but genuinely interacting, where each really benefits from the contribution the other makes. And that kind of reciprocal working, where we learn something in the science from Caroline's work and from the experiments that she puts people through, but she's also using it to create art and to create experiences for people. Should also tell you that the Proust phenomenon is one of the sort of big topics of another AHRC-funded network, the Memory Network, and I'm very much hoping you'll come and join them and talk more about Proust. But as we talk about different cultures, as you have, we're crossing cultures because we are having Charles Michel, a trained chef, who's going to tell us a little bit about his adventures and also tell us why the multisensory means so much to him. Charles, welcome.
Thank you. So Barry likes a lot to talk about my Colombian nationality. I'm also French, but I think, the Colombian side is really powerful in me and in my inspirations. Let me talk to you a bit about my background as a cook. I studied at the Institut Paul Bocuse, where I learned all the basics of culinary traditions, how that with our hands we could transform food into delicious things to eat. So that was for 2 years in Lyon. Then I went to Dal Pescatore in Italy, where you see on the far right Nadia Santini, who became my master and my teacher, and she used to talk about how it was not only about what was happening in the dish and the recipe and the ingredients, it was also about transmitting pleasure and psychological wellness. She wanted people to feel happy. She wanted to transmit joy. And that's what I saw in people coming to the restaurant, and it was beautiful because they were living this amazing experience where they met this family, Santini family, who has been around since 1927. This restaurant, grandmother Bruna in the middle is still doing the risotto today. So today Wednesday, she's probably in the kitchen and she won't let anyone touch her risotto. So it was beautiful. To live that experience, and so the approach to traditions that they had at the Pescatore, the wellness that they wanted to transmit to their clients, the culinary technique. Then I went back to Colombia, where here I'm on a beach. I'm cooking on a beach with a beautiful tradition bearer. She taught me there. We were cooking a lobster in some kind of Colombian sauce with coconut milk. So I had this beautiful experience of re-meeting my country, my Colombian nationality through its flavors. So at the same time, I was also doing consultancy for restaurants, teaching and cooking schools, and doing my own events where I could also play with all these ingredients. But Colombians weren't so keen on their own ingredients. So I found that was quite frustrating because I knew that a good dish was about the technique that I learned in France, mainly about the products and the relationship to the quality and the relationship to the earth somehow, and about passion. But I served this dish, for example, and if I told the name of that dish to my clients in Colombia, they would say, no, we don't want that. We don't want that. That's not good. It's a hogao. It's a Colombian sauce, traditional Colombian sauce, and they would say, no, that's no good. Coconut milk, no, we don't want that. Cook us some risotto, you know that, you've done it. I never did a risotto before when I came out of the Pescatore, but that's what they wanted me to cook for them. So they were kind of blinded, and they wouldn't recognize the beauty of Colombian ingredients. So that led me to that salad in particular. So I was a bit frustrated that I couldn't cook Colombian traditions because they wouldn't buy it, basically. So I got inspired by this painting by Kandinsky at the MoMA Museum, and I transformed the aesthetic message of Kandinsky into a salad, and there Colombians loved it. So that was really interesting. So Charles Spence was there the first time I prepared this salad. Because it was a tasting menu, and there was one dish for each sense. So that was the visual sense, and it actually we tested. So now I'm here in England doing research at the Cross Model Lab with Charles Spence, and we tested this dish. So in 3 presentations. One was this beautiful canvas. The other was just mixing the ingredients, placed in the middle of the plate. The other one was just the ingredients placed side by side. And the interesting thing was that people liked more, intuitively recognized the artistic presentation. They found it to be more complex. They liked it more. And when they tried it, they rated it as being more flavorful, even though it was the exact same quantity of the same ingredients. So that means first of all, that with our eyes first, and what we see determines, or the expectations we have determine our flavor perception, and also that somehow we can eat art. I go back to this beautiful quote by Auguste Escoffier, who actually came to London and became famous in London more than 100 years ago. So he said, culinary art, by the form of its manifestations, depend on the psychological state of society. And I think that's really, really important, because the way we eat means a lot, says a lot about the way we relate to our planet somehow. and to the other humans. So what would be the future of food? I think that's a question that we have to really focus on today, and we have big challenges like being 20 billion humans in a few decades, or like global warming, and we know now that the way we eat affects that. So what's the future of food? I'm going to go to the next slide, this one. What's the future of food? So there's neurogastronomy, beautiful tool that a few scientists are going into, and the chefs are getting inspired by that. How do we perceive food? So we know flavor is a perception and not only a sensation. So a lot of chefs should stop focusing on how technique or how precise is their skill to do the dish, and they should think about how we perceive it actually, how to play with sounds and touch and expectations in many ways. So, for example, Caroline says she likes the cutlery on the fork on one particular side. I don't like forks. We have beautiful hands. We have a beautiful evolutive tool that allows us to sense what we eat. So I think that's one of the things. If you have your hands cleaned in a restaurant, for example, and you eat with your hands, you're going to enjoy it more. That's you're going to integrate the touch in a much more pleasurable. And you all, I think we could do a research here, and I bet about 90% of you would say that they really enjoy eating with their hands. So that could be the neurogastronomy. There's gastrophysics, which is understanding the molecular and physical properties of the food, but also how we perceive them and how food also affects our physiology. And there's also a lot of beautiful molecules in food that can really excite us, like spicy, and well, we'll see soon. And there's this beautiful grasshopper there. I don't know if that gives you a smile or a bit of disgust. And I think neurogastronomy, both neurogastronomy, gastrophysics, can help us humans eat more insects, start eating them in the first place. And I think our meat-based diets today, like the way we eat on a daily basis in Western countries, is not sustainable. We know that. We know that, and we have to change. We have to find new ways of doing sustainable food for humans, basically. So we need to find ways of cooking that and to beautiful shaped nuggets, play with the right expectations, and then a beautiful sauce, and we'll be eating nuggets that are 50% sustainable source of protein. And there's biotech, so GM foods, where it's the devil today. But I've been to a few talks in Oxford, and that's what's cool about being there, meeting a lot of people that have different views and that know a lot about the science underlying those GM foods. So I think what they say is not it's not a bullet, a silver bullet. It means that's not going to save the world, but it's definitely something that we could use. Like, for example, they said this golden rice. So they basically made this rice that has vitamin A, which is one of the causes of the highest causes of death from starvation is the deficit of vitamin A. So why not? I mean, we have to consider all the options possible to design the future, the foods of the future. So I come back to this one. A quote by the visionary Auguste Escoffier, that is the grandfather of today's traditional cuisine. But he was much more of a visionary than much of the traditional chefs today, I think. So he said, as flavors are under constant refinement, cooking is perpetually improving to satisfy them. It will become more scientific and more specific. Another beautiful quote, cuisine has to be the harmony that reflects the wonders of the earth. I think that basically says we have to have a good relationship with nature through food, and I think there's a lot of answers there. Now I'm doing research, Oxford stuff, as Caroline says, doing multisensory experiences, art events involving food to make people change their minds about what they eat. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. That was great to have a wider perspective on what we're doing. So you've seen in these short talks tonight that we've been hearing from medieval historian, from a neurogastronomist, neuroscientist and psychologist, from a food artist, and from a chef researcher, myself as a philosopher. And this is only a tiny number of the people we'll need to concentrate their work and their ideas and their collaboration together to understand food and flavor. As a philosopher, I'm very interested in this question of subjectivity and objectivity, whether it's chefs that make flavors or brains that make flavors. But to get you to wonder about that, we're going to take you now for the practical part. And we've heard this very nice reminder we had from Charles Michel and also earlier from Caroline, that we've got expectation leading up to eating, and then, as Charles taught us, an awful lot going on as we're eating and an awful lot of things influencing. But then there's the memory of eating that remarkable bottle of wine or that great meal that you'll never forget. You'll remember who was there, the color of the wallpaper, the sounds around you, everything will be so vivid. So we're going to hope to give you some memorable experiences, but now it's time for you to try and to experiment and to engage your senses with us. So we're going to give out tasting menus to you. Your tasting menus now will have a number on them. And when you go out into the hall, look for the person who's indicating your number. It'll be 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 and 6. And they will direct you to the room, and you will have your tasting menu in a certain order. We'll all be there to talk to you, but we've got a few minutes while the menus are going around. If there were any questions, and if anybody would like to ask anything of our speakers. Yes, we've got one here. Ian, please.
I'm not sure who the question's for, but I was just wondering whether the impact of...
Should be on? Is it on?
Whether the impact of how people use food in the first world as a tool for enjoyment and going out, how people perceive taste differs to, say, maybe where people are having to, food is just a thing to keep them alive.
Charles, or I think Chris, in a historical way, touched on that. Maybe, Chris, I could invite you to say something about this.
I think lots of people enjoy food. I think there are all sorts of elements of social conditioning about how you enjoy it, whether you should enjoy it, with whom you should enjoy it. It's quite hard to, I think, answer that sort of question directly, because there are so many possible contexts in which food can be consumed and which it can be prepared. There are quite often within a society different cuisines, and if I was an anthropologist, I would expect to see an elite cuisine with male chefs, if you like, and a sort of demotic cuisine, perhaps run by the women doing the cooking, and they provide different philosophies, really, for why and how food is eaten. So it's quite hard to see a division between one world and another, because I suspect there are a very great many experiences in these different worlds.
You might also expect that when people are hungry, when people are very close to starvation, that if there is an edible and nutritious source of food around, they'll eat it. But there are parts of the world where people are in that condition and manioc is locally available and they won't eat manioc. Whereas if you go to South America, people will have it as a food of choice. They'll have it and want to eat it. So it's very interesting that discrimination of what you will find acceptable or not still remains, even under extremes. Caroline.
Yeah, I just wanted to say or add to that even when you're hungry, I think food is never just reduced to pure nutrition. And I went to Pakistan into some camps, and when people are very, very hungry, they even put more emphasis on the eating experience. So it's and then so many fantastic literature has been written during wartime hunger years, where people go on about the absence of something. I mean, often is a very common tool in literature. The absence of food or of something is described by describing the foods you had in the plenty, or like longing or wishing for a certain food. So I think because obviously dealing with eating experiences where there is a lot of food, it's like, you're playing with food and people are going hungry. How does that coincide. But I think it's people always have the right for eating experience, and food is so much more than just nutrition, even when people don't have any.
Even when people are hungry. One last question I think we have time for here in the middle.
Different people have talked about different conditions under which eating is taking place. Has anybody done anything objectively with regard to the brain, for instance, doing functional MRI studies?
There's
when,
yes.
you know, under all these different sorts of eating.
There is a lot of study coming. Not as much as, certainly not as much as you'd have on some of the other senses. And part of the problem is that, as you may know, when you're in an MRI scanner and you want to do fMRI, you have to keep very still. So it's very difficult. If you've got them chewing, you're probably going to blur those nice, lovely pictures where you see bits of the brain lighting up. There have been 2 studies that I'm very interested in where they were studying sommeliers identifying wines. Now, it's a very uncomfortable experience. You're lying on your back, you have a tube inserted into your mouth, and it's directing liquid, and you're told just to let the liquid go in and try not to do too much swallowing. Nonetheless, under those conditions, the results are very interesting because they answer the following questions. Who do you think uses more of their cortical regions? Who uses more of the brain when they're trying to identify a wine? The expert or the novice? Any guesses? So it's the expert who uses less of the brain because they know exactly what to use, and the rest of us may be trying to use everything that's in our field. Second question, how much of the brain is active in either the expert or the novice when tasting water? And the answer is huge amounts in the expert. Even when they're tasting water, they can't turn off that capacity to evaluate and assess. And the final question that some of this research addresses is, who gets most pleasure, the sommelier or the novice? Now, the novice? It's the sommelier. And that's why we do the science, because the answers are surprising. So yes, there is some fMRI done. Thank you all very much. Let's go and taste.
Absolutely amazing. I was not expecting that. If anybody told me I tasted through my nose, I would have told them that they were probably tasting through somewhere else.